every year. So I just want to go over a little bit of business first before we jump into the talks. So we're so lucky to have this conference. When I think about the different topics that we've covered in previous years with death, dying, and bereavement, racial stress, LGBTQ, motivational interviewing, we cover a lot of ground, but at the heart of it, what we're hoping to do is to equip everyone here, whether in your professional role, in your role as a family member, friend, or neighbor, to serve better, to be able to help other people. And we hope to accomplish that by giving you a space to connect with each other, to talk. This is much broader than a social work community. We have allied professionals here, and it's so great. You're all coming from such different spaces that it's an opportunity to connect or reconnect, and then to grow by learning something new. And we have amazing presenters today that I was actually shocked. I'm like, I'll have to beg and plead because they're so amazing. And they were gracious enough to say they'd come and teach us what they know. So we're hoping that by connecting with each other and growing that you can serve better. And it's kind of like Dolly Parton said, if you don't like the road you're on, pave a new one. And so you're all there helping people pave new roads. And we just want to help you in that process. Give you some asphalt, concrete, new shovel, so that you could be like, yeah, let's do that. Let's help you out a little bit. This would totally not be possible if it weren't for our funders, the Marjorie P. Hinckley Endowed Chair in Social Work and Social Sciences. I mean, isn't it a beautiful thing that, at least we're attempting to reduce some access barriers, that ability to pay didn't impact whether you could come to the conference necessarily. There's other things I'm sure we can work on for access, but we want this to be wide open for people. And you get a lunch. Hello. I'll take that any day. I'm like, you gonna eat that? I'll have it, that's fine. And so it's just, that sort of thing wouldn't be possible. And Dr. Behrman and Dr. Robbins, they wouldn't be able to come unless we could make it possible with the resources. So we're so grateful for that fund and for AmeriCorps for chipping in and making today possible. It's also like a huge team of people that make this work. Hey, everyone's like, I saw my name. Yes. There's so many hands that touch this work to make it possible. And so really want to extend appreciation and gratitude for all the people that did the big and small things to make this work for us today so that we could come together, connect, and grow. Okay, let's go over a little more business, then we'll have a prayer, and I'll jump in with my talk. So parking, we are the star, as it should be, right? We are all the stars. And then the 16 and 49, those are just numbers for parking lots. So those are the places where you can park. And so if by chance you've parked somewhere other than that, you might want to go move your car sooner than later, because you might show up and it'll be like, thank you for coming to BYU, your donation is greatly appreciated. And then you can pay a little parking ticket. So, but these lots, we've indicated, they've said, okay, well, we know you have conference goers, so we won't be monitoring those lots in the same way we normally do. And then CEUs, we have CEUs for social workers and our allied professional friends here today. The way that it'll work, we've got your information with your name tag. We know that you're here attending, and then at the conclusion of today, there will be a QR code in both tracks so that you can take an exit survey, and then there will just be some information we need to populate your certificate. And then we will also send that out via email as well for those who don't catch it then, and that's how you'll be able to get your CEUs. Okay, so that's all the business that we have. We will start with a prayer. Sarah Fox, she's a first-year student in our MSW program. She will offer our prayer.
Our Father in heaven, we are so grateful to be gathered here as a community of helpers. We're grateful for the presenters, and we pray that that will be with them today, that they will be able to share the things that they have studied and learned to help all of us become better instruments. We are grateful for our brothers and sisters and for the opportunities we have to help lift and strengthen them. We pray that these skills will be developed today, and we say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Okay, I have to have a timekeeping device because I want to make sure that I maximize our time with our visitors. So my hope today in my opening remarks is to cover a few basic things so that Dr. Behrman and Dr. Robbins can jump right into what you do with these models. In conversations that we've had together, I'm so glad that our thinking has been aligned where you get the most out of these trainings when you hear it, but then when you get a chance to try it, or you get a chance to see it. And so that our hope is that today, when you all leave this conference, that if you had a client at the end of today, you could be like, I think I could try some of this, actually. There's something here that I feel like I could maybe implement, or it might increase your appetite to pursue additional training with them as well, which I'm really pumped about. So specifically for my portion, I just want you to walk away with 2 bits of information. One is that you could walk away and say, I know what transdiagnostic treatments are, because that will make you feel smart, right? It'll make you feel like you use big words to say things, and they'll be like, oh, you're a therapist, you're so smart. You're like, yes, I use big words, and that's really important. But we're going to explain it in a way that you're like, it's not that fancy, actually. It's pretty common sense. And then the other thing is why? Like, why should you even care about this? There are so many treatments out there. What's the point of coming yet to another conference to learn yet another model? And so hopefully I will have accomplished my goals by the end of my chat if you know those 2 things. Okay, so we're going to do a poll. I know you're thrilled about that. So if you have a smartphone, if you could be so kind as to snap a pic of the QR, and there's just 2 questions, and the responses to that will help me sort of modify how fast or slow I go through the next content. All right, so the 2 questions, what would you say is your sort of main clinical approach, and how familiar are you with transdiagnostic treatments? So by far the biggest winner for clinical approach here, cognitive behavioral, that's like the biggest approach, followed by person-centered. Awesome. And then we've got, then in sort of a distant third, eclectic or like an integrationist. That also is really close with solution-focused. Okay, so we've got mostly a lot of familiarity with CBT, which will be hugely, hugely beneficial for our presenters to have that. I told them, I'm like, yeah, that's a safe starting place, and I'm glad that played out. And then also, you're in the right place because it looks like the majority of you are not familiar at all with transdiagnostic care. And then the next big chunk are just slightly familiar. Perfect. All right. You're in the right place. We're all doing the right things. This is great. Okay. Let's get back to this. Okay, what is transdiagnostic care? I'll put up like a definition from an article, but I want to give a simple definition first. What if there was a treatment that could be applied to a variety of primary concerns? A single treatment to a variety of concerns. And then, of course, in research, we try to make things more complicated. And there is a bit of this that there is some dispute about, but it's to apply the same underlying treatment principles across mental disorders without tailoring the protocol. That last phrase is, that's not a set thing, because there is quite a bit of tailoring that can happen if it's anxiety versus depression, for example. But the idea is, compared to using discrete, this treatment is for depression, this treatment is for anxiety, it's not as stark as that. It's saying, I have a treatment with a few modifications could apply to both of those things. There are 3 types of transdiagnostic treatments. There are universally applied therapeutic principles, modular treatments, and shared mechanisms treatment. We'll go over these briefly, and then I'll talk a little bit more about the why. So this is filling that first objective of saying, what is this thing that we're talking about, and then give you the why afterwards. So this first bit here, so when I graduated from with my MSW in Massachusetts, and then lived and worked in New York City for years. And one of my favorite events of the year in New York City was Restaurant Week, because it was a chance where I could go to restaurants I couldn't normally afford, and they would have this prefix menu where the chef would say, here's the appetizer, here's the entree, and here's the dessert. And there would be a price that was much better than it normally was. And so being a social worker in Brooklyn at the time, that was really helpful to be able to say, oh, I could go in there. So I go and I'm like, I eat here all the time. what is this? Like, I don't even know what this stuff is. And so I would go in and I would eat, and there was no alterations, there was no changing. It was just someone who knew a bunch of stuff said, this is a really good combination of food. And I went in like, that makes a whole lot of sense. And it was good, and I enjoyed it. So when I come with these universal principles, there are schools of thought that if you were to go into a session, whether they're presenting with depression, anxiety, trauma, there's things that you're just going to provide everyone because you feel like it's going to be helpful. One kind of example I can think of is client-centered therapy, which a number of you espoused as practicing. Because if you went into a session with Carl Rogers and sat down with him, what is he going to provide you? Well, regardless of what you're coming up with, he's going to be empathetic, he's going to be genuine, he's going to do this unconditional positive regard. Like, that is something that he's going to offer you if you're coming in saying you're anxious, if you're coming in saying you're depressed, if you're coming in. There's just certain things that model says, this is good medicine, this is a good meal. And I think a number of you who work in that space could say, yeah, it actually is really great. You'd be surprised at what you can do when you just hang in there with the person and let them feel seen and loved, how curative that can be. So I'm like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. There are a variety of models that are like prefix menus that a chef comes up with and says, if you do this, it'll probably be pretty good. The next is a modular treatment. So with modular treatments, I like to think of this like a buffet. And so someone's come together and they're like, man, the mashed potatoes, really great. But some people like green beans and other people like the sweet potatoes, but everyone wants that, and so you've got this assortment that you're like, we know that these are well-liked, good dishes that a variety of people coming in here would really appreciate. And so then it would be like me walking with a friend and being like, oh yeah, gotta try that. You told me that you love Mediterranean, you really should get some of that, and those, and those. But then the next person comes, I'm like, what do you like? Oh, I'm more of a Thai person. You're like, okay, let's go down here. And so let's pick some of these elements for you. And so the clinician in that space is saying, based off of what you need, what you want, and what we know empirically works in those situations, let's take those modules and apply it to your presenting concern. So there's a treatment called MATCH, ADTC. It's youth-focused, and that's exactly what it is. There are 33 modules, and what you do is you come in, you'll do an assessment, and then there's a pathway to say, well, if the primary concern is depression, here's a menu of food that would best probably treat that. Let's try a couple of those out to see how far we get. So we've got prefix, where the chef is like, this is good. A buffet, where you still have someone saying, these are good things, but there's a little more flexibility in applying it. And then, so like here are some of the interventions, right? A fear ladder, that's the term they'll use for an exposure to get to different levels of exposure. And then cognitive stop for anxiety. If the kid has anxious thoughts, then we'll get a tray of cognitive stop. And if they're actually facing depression, we'll use cognitive coping blue. Acronyms everywhere, right? Because those also make us feel smart, right? And it actually simplifies what comes out of our mouth. But that's just saying that's what the dishes are, and you would put them on the plate and see how it goes for your client. Okay, so then this last bit is this notion that there might be an underlying cause, and there's many ways of getting at that underlying cause, but really what you're treating is an underlying cause that's showing up in different ways. Underlying cause showing up in different ways, but what you're trying to get at is the underlying cause. And for this, I think of, like, if you're a person who, like my sister, for example, she's like all into macros, you know what I'm saying? Like a balanced macro situation, where it's like, well, there could be a variety of different plates, but at the end of the day, they're tapping into like a good balance of macros. And some people even get those boxed orders to your house that you make for yourself, but it's a balanced meal of certain nutrition factors that they're like, underneath this, there's lots of foods you could eat that could get there, but really it's a balanced macro that we're aiming for, an underlying cause. And so CBTE, specific to eating disorders, is an example where the underlying cause is an overvaluation of shape and weight. That's what you're tapping into there. And then also today when we'll be talking about the unified protocol, that has underneath a negative affect syndrome, saying, well, if we can get to that, a lot of the things above it should also be resolved as well. Sorry, Kate, not to put you on the spot, where would you say?
I was just trying to decide.
Yeah.
I would say it is like you have your different food
Uh-huh.
in first, and there are different things you can have to meet the needs of those.
Perfect. So also that could be here too, where it's just this pushing. So and I'll talk a little bit more specifically about First Unified Protocol. Like first is going past the buffet style and saying, okay, there's something underlying this, and there's a combination of foods that could tap into that. So today, in the adult training and youth training, the good thing is you're not going to miss anything. Because if you go to the youth, we're recording the adult and vice versa, so that you will be able to have both. Our presenters have generously allowed us to record them, and you will, because you've registered for the conference, will have access to them for a month. So whichever one you go to, you'll be fine, because you'll be able to see the other one. One will be adult-focused, and the other is more child and youth-focused. But these are both saying this idea. What if you had one treatment that helped with a variety of things? And what's the whole point of that? So let's talk about the point. So I can remember when I was working, I've worked in a school-based mental health, outpatient mental health, and a clinic that provided care for mostly folks who had Medicaid insurance, and a child welfare space, and a fee-for-service outpatient mental health, and private practice now. And in all of these spaces, I was viewed and worked mostly as a generalist. And what I mean generalist is people didn't come and say, well, Cole, you do work with eating disorders, so we're going to go to you. It was just a clinic where we didn't have that luxury to have specialties like that. We would have interests, but it was like depression, it was anxiety. I had kiddos that were engaging in self-harm and then some body issues. And so I don't know if you've had that experience in your practice where you need to be a little bit of a generalist. And you're like, oh, there's so many things. And I remember, I'm like, okay, I don't think I'm being good at any of them. I don't feel good at any of them. And I don't like that feeling. And so I was like, okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to start by analyzing my caseload. So I took all the cases that I had, and I said, okay, what are the primary concerns of these cases? And it's like, okay, we had some depression, some transition conduct, relationship issues, and I was just mapping it out. And then I was like, okay, which one do I have the most of? Okay, maybe I should pursue training and specialization in that so that I can at least meet that need. And then over time, it will be like Pokemon, and I will gather them all. And I will just try to get this one, and that one, and that one. And so I was talking to Dr. Bearman and Robbins last night. So in New York, there are just a ton of freestanding institutes that specialize in everything. And so I started doing this tour of open houses where they're trying to entice you to come and pay your money and do everything. So you get essentially another graduate degree, but without a degree. And so I was going to these, and my wife, she's an attorney, and at the time was working in this big Manhattan law firm, mergers, acquisitions, and I was like a social worker in Brooklyn, and she's like, I work for the man, and he helps people. And so I was like, you should come with me to one of these open houses. So we go. It is a really excellent institute, very excellent training. And so I went there, and it was, similar to this, maybe half. And they had a stage, and they had a video playing of a client, and like an interaction between a client and a therapist. And these three super expert therapists in their specialty, they would play a bit of the clip, and then they would pause, and they would say, Dr. So-and-so, what do you think? And then from their lens, they would be like, what I'm seeing here is a lot of resistance. What I'm seeing here. And they're just kind of going through what they think, and another person's like, the body. Do you see what their body is doing? It's a more somatic base. And then they would say how they would respond and what they would do. And we would watch like 10 seconds, like a sentence from these people. And we would go on and on and on and on and be like, they use the word the. Fascinating, fascinating. And afterwards, like we were walking home, and my wife was like, is that honestly what you all do? It's like every sentence you're just like, the? Is that what you're really interested in? I'm like, well, I guess that's what we do. A little bit. Yeah, we do that. We do that a lot. And so she's like, great, awesome, we're in safe hands. I'm like, I know, it's so messed up. And so I just couldn't pick. I went to each single one, and they're like, well, find something that kind of speaks to you. And I don't know if you have this, but I have this shiny ball syndrome, where I'm like, ooh, pretty. ooh, pretty. And so I just would be like, chase that. And so I'm like, that makes so much sense. And I would go to a training, I'm like, yeah, it is all about your childhood, duh. And then I would go to another place like, don't even worry about that. It's like how they're behaving in the moment. I'm like, right on. That's exactly what we do. It's all about behavior. I don't care how you feel. It's just what you do. And then another place is like, upstairs is where it counts. It's like how you see the world up here. I'm like, yeah, dang it. Like, I don't know what to do with any of that. And so here comes transdiagnostic treatments, where they're like, what if all of those are important, and it's more of having a principle-based approach, a thoughtful approach, that you could interweave these key concepts for the benefit of your clients. And so then instead of getting training in all of these single interventions that have been proven to show that they're really helpful and are great, instead of doing like those 12 to meet the needs of my caseload, what if I could do 1 or 2 to meet that same need? And so then that would drive my practice deeper, because then I'm just working in that space with those ideas, and I could increase my reach. It would free up some space. So that sparked my interest in transdiagnostic treatment. So efficient. What if with your CEU, your supervision dollars, there was a model that you could do that would reach many, if not all of your clients, instead of really having to dig deep for a number of years to specialize, to get to the 3rd level of Shangri-La and call yourself like, I am the super duper XYZ. What if there was a place that you could pause and find strength that would meet a lot of your clients? Comorbidity. With single diagnosis treatments, one of the issues with that is, I don't know if I need a raise of hand, and I'm just going to check my time to make sure I'm not perfect. We're doing right. I had so many clients that if I did get training in depression, they're like, oh, but I'm also really anxious. I'm like, oh, right, okay, so do I do both? Do I do one? Do I do them at the same time? Because this is slightly different. I'm not quite sure what to do. What if we tackle one at a time? What if we just did one at a time? And that's where I would kind of put my hat, is like, I think we might just need to tackle this one at a time. When in fact, some of these transdiagnostic treatments have comorbidity built in to it, to say, yeah, actually, it's a lot of these things up here show up together because there's an underlying concern that they're all activating. So let's just go down a level and see if we could do something there, and it could help both. So you felt like your treatment plan wasn't just, client will reduce intensity, frequency of anxiety over a period, client will reduce depression, and we were targeting that, but it could be one goal, one ring to rule them all, you know what I'm saying? It's like one of those situations. And the other thing is efficacy. So it's part of our job to make sure we're picking those things that are most likely going to help people. So it's not like a guessing game with people's lives, where we're just like, we'll see, time, money, what's the law? No, it's like we need to pick things that we're like, there's a better than chance odds that this is going to help you get to where you want to be. And so with the models that we're going to be talking about today, I'll share specific data about those. But broadly, what they're finding is these transdiagnostic treatments are doing one of 2 things: performing as well as single diagnosis treatments. So if you're picking, you're like, oh, I don't know if one's better than the other. You're both beautiful. You're both fine. And so it's like these 2 are both fine. And now actually we're getting some data from some recent trials that shows in some instances that even the transdiagnostic treatments are outperforming in some ways. And there's still, it's tentative and we need to figure it out and do more testing. But at the end of the day, even if they are the same effect, it comes back to arguments of comorbidity and efficiency. If you're like, okay, this works, and this will cover more clients, this I'll have to get trained in 6 more, and they're all going to be helpful to my client, or I could try to put my hat here. There's still an argument for efficiency. Okay, so now I want to talk a little bit about the 2 models that we're presenting today. So the unified protocol, so that's for the adult track. So the unified protocol, Dr. David Barlow team, they have been playing with these ideas for a long time, decades now. The first manualized version of this was in 2011. They have a second edition out, and what I'm showing here is the clinician-facing therapist guide, and then also the workbook that is client-facing and is the type that is actually like a self-help book that clients you could give for bibliotherapy or just as a standalone if people just wanted to use it on their own. It's excellent self-guided work. So they were going through and they were noticing that, as I said, this is one of those that has an underlying issue that they were talking about, and noticing that in depression and in its various iterations, and in anxiety with its various iterations, traumatic responses in its various iterations, that there was a common problem, negative affect syndrome, as it's used in some of this literature, and that has 3 pieces to it. It says these 3 things show up a lot and causes problems, depression, anxiety, etc. Frequent, intense negative emotion. There are just certain people, biologically, temperament, contextually, environmentally, that they experience the world in a much more intense way, and it hits them in bigger waves than someone else. I don't know if you've seen clients where it's like, it kind of elicits that response where you're like, well, then what else happened? Because their response feels maybe outsized from what the stimulus was, but they just experience it in such a bigger way. And then after having this big experience to a stimulus, then they have a negative reaction to it. It's like, man, and then I felt dumb for feeling that way, or they start judging that big reaction that they had. And then the next bit that they'll engage in is then they start to avoid that. They start to try to run away. Big feeling, think it's bad, steer clear of it. And so if you have that combination of things going on inside of you, that can show up differently, but it can show up as depression, it can show up as anxiety, reactions to trauma, others. And so this model is attacking that. It's like, let's try to improve this, and if we can improve this, there will be a positive connection to the other issues that they might be facing. So the treatment. There are 8 modules total that Dr. Robbins will be going over today. 5 are considered core, and then 3 are part of the mix as well to help prime motivation, to make plans for retention of your gains. Here are the 5 modules that we'll be going over: mindful emotion awareness, cognitive flexibility, countering emotional behaviors, facing physical sensations, and emotion exposure. And so as a treatment, it is modular in the sense that it is possible. They have trials where it's even been done in single sittings, where you can do it a little buffet style too, if it makes a whole lot of sense, or sequentially, according to the modules as they're presented. So the adult section, that's what you'll be going over. And these are the diagnoses or primary concerns that have been tested with this model. So if you have any clients with social anxiety, panic, generalized anxiety, depression, urgency, trauma, stress-related or eating disorders, problematic substance, this might be a good fit. You know what I'm saying? And so it's like one of those things where they've applied it to these various situations and found that they all have a common core and that they could get better from these modules. So I've asked the presenters, I'm like, don't worry about going into a lot of the research, because let's just get to how you do this. Let's just get to doing it. And they were so kind to accommodate that. So I wanted to tell you that there is a lot of research, actually, that supports this, that this is one of those bets that you could be like, all right, better than chance odds that this is going to help people. Here are a number of the citations of systematic reviews, meta-analyses that have shown that it performs just as well as single diagnosis treatments, that in some cases it's improved retention or completion rates with some clients, that maybe it's not a clinical outcome, but it's a service-based outcome. So it's certainly a model that's worth your time. It's been helpful to a lot of different people, and it has a lot of the pros of the efficiency in working with comorbidity. Okay, I want to make sure that I read it right, because these are superstars, and they deserve everything that we have about them. So Dr. Robbins, she's a licensed psychologist and currently working in the Triangle area in Durham, North Carolina. She's dedicated to providing evidence-based treatment to adolescents, adults, as well as training to grad students, postdocs, to deliver these treatments. Dr. Robbins provides clinical services to adolescents and adults with a focus on treating emotion dysregulation, misophonia, a condition in which people are reactive to specific sounds. She also provides supervision to trainees in the clinic. She's the co-director of the Unified Protocol Institute, who oversees this treatment. She's published numerous peer-reviewed papers on the development, adaptation, and evaluation of transdiagnostic treatments. She is a co-author of the Unified Protocol Transdiagnostic Treatment for Emotional Disorders manual, so the most current manual. Actually, the first one, too. Weren't you on that first? Okay, the second one, the most current manual. She is a co-author and has been a trainer in treatment for 10 years. So, co-director of their training institute. She's co-author of the edition of the manual that you'll be looking at, co-developer of the adherence standards for that model, and a co-developer of the training materials. So, done trainings all over the place, and we're in super good hands. So this is as close as it gets, you know? So if you want to know the UP, she's here. And so it's a great opportunity to learn that model. Okay, now let's talk about youngsters. And so children and adolescents, different than adults, different than working with adults. And so we also have an amazing intervention program here, a way of doing clinical work that can be applied to youngsters. Principle-guided psychotherapy for children and adolescents. The first program, so you'll see me use the word first. It's a good mnemonic to sort of remember the key principles of treatment, which is super helpful. So this is hot off the presses in my mind. Dr. Behrman and Dr. Weiss recently published the guide for this. There was a sort of a predecessor that began some thinking, but this is so different. It's like an evolution to it. The predecessor was Match that I was talking about, that took these like a buffet style, and you could use these different modules and apply them to clients. This is advancing that thinking and saying, you know what, there's probably core principles that we could use that would apply broadly to any sort of underlying primary concern, so that it isn't so much like a, well, this principle, we know that through all these randomized control trials that it's a good thing. It's like, we know that, we started there, but what's the overarching principle and guidance? Let's think at that level, because it provides us more flexibility. So the pathology, from this perspective, it's a biopsychosocial view of pathology, so disorders are multi-determined. Lots of different things that can cause problems. It could come from predispositions, temperaments, life events, learning. So any person coming in, there might be any number of ways that they came to their primary concern. So that the pathology is for that particular model. This also, conveniently, has 5 core principles as well, which will be, for the youth track today, these will be there's going to be a broad overview of the model and then a briefer discussion of these items. Dr. Behrman was kind enough. I was like, normally the training would be like 2.5 days or so for that model. But I was like, is there any way that you could do something in a day, please? And so she was kind enough to take what they normally do and at least give us all a flavor of it here with some really practical applications for us. And so here are the 5: feeling calm, increasing motivation, repairing thoughts, solving problems, trying the opposite. Concerns treated: anxiety and all of its cousins, OCD and all of its cousins, post-traumatic stress, depression and its cousins, and then misbehavior. And that covers, oppositional defiant conduct. And so if you're working with a youth that has any of those concerns, this would be an excellent model to learn. This also, when we were kind of coming through and putting together this conference, there were a few criteria. We wanted models that were sort of immediately applicable, that you could walk away and be like, oh, I can do some stuff with it. That there was empirical support, that we have research to show that it's something that we should hang our hat on, and that the presenters were awesome. And so we checked all 3 boxes with that. And so here are some of the trials that are either going on or have gone on that have supported FIRST. Similar ways, performing well, and it has a lot of service outcomes that also show it's like, this is worth our time. This is worth us looking at and spending some of our CEU time and money on. Okay, back here because I want to make sure I catch it all. So Dr. Sarah K. Behrman is a clinical child psychologist, an associate professor at the University of Texas at Austin in the Department of Educational Psychology, and an associate professor in the Department of Psychiatry at Dell Medical School. Dr. Behrman's research focuses on the effectiveness and implementation of empirically supported practices for youth and families in resource-limited, publicly funded settings, if that rings a bell for any of us. She's interested in understanding how existing research about youth mental health treatment can be used to adapt, develop, or support interventions that are user-friendly, accessible, and sustainable in places where children and families receive services. She is the co-author of the treatment manual, Principle-Guided Psychotherapy for Children and Adolescents, the first program for behavioral and emotional problems, and has been involved in a number of studies testing mental health interventions for youth in schools, clinics, pediatric primary care, and with peer support services. She's also interested in how clinical supervision can best support therapists' competency in treatment, and the ways in which this can be leveraged in usual care settings. She provides both clinical supervision, national trainings for therapists in the use of treatment for anxiety, depression, disruptive conduct, and traumatic stress. So same thing, like if this is something you're interested in, like these people literally wrote the books on them. And so it's as close as you're gonna get to developers of these models. And they've been kind enough to take some time and travel and time away from their families to be with us today. So we're super, super lucky. Okay, I think we actually have a little time for some questions. Great, we do. So we have a couple minutes. If I could have some help with microphones so that if you have a question, thank you, Dave, we can talk a little bit about it. Anyone else can help me with a microphone? Briley, thank you so much. Okay, any questions about just the setup? What are diagnostic treatments and transdiagnostic treatments, and then why? Like, why do we care about them? Excellent. Nice. Mission accomplished. We have a question over here.
In learning about transdiagnostic treatments, if we're wanting to implement and utilize these, is this something where we do need specialized training, or is this something where we read a book or we attend a training? Yeah. How do you go about becoming A, good at it, and B, like, is there a certification process needed?
Love that. That's a great question. I think they'll both talk in their specific tracks about the specifics, but yes, there's additional training. So like for the first program, today's like the primer for it, but there would be the more like the 2.5-day thing that you would do. And then the UP also has a training protocol where it's like, this is like the workshop that you do to do the first level. And then if you want to proceed, then there's another level that you can get more targeted feedback on your application of the principles. And they're actually, as I understand it, are reviewing and building it, so it might even be different in the near future as far as what it is. But yeah, so we would need some additional things, but I also know that you're gonna be able to use some things today. And the books, actually the manuals are also super great, where if you took I kind of want to quote you from what you said. It's like, you got the book, you know.
You do. The training's helpful. You can also use that.
Yeah. One thing that I love about both of these models is built into it, and something that Dr. Robbins said the other day too is these were built off of grants, our money paid for a lot of this work, and they're trying to give back to us, and so they've really tried to increase access. So compared to other models, it's not as heavy of a load. I think we have one more question here.
Are the books going to be sold here?
No, that's one thing that we screwed up on.
Okay.
I was like, why didn't I have a stack of them?
Get it from Amazon.
Yes, Amazon for sure. We should like put a link or something, or like, I should have sold them for $5 more today. I should have been like, they're really $30, so if you want it today, could have been my lunch money or something. Great question. Oh, excellent question. Oh, one more? Great. Love it.
Thanks.
I am wondering if any of the research has been done around substance use with either of these.
Ooh, great. I'll pause. Nods. Yeah. Children and youth, not so much. In fact, Match doesn't have it either with substance.
Yeah, I would say if it's the primary concern versus is not the right.
Yeah.
If someone has a substance use disorder, a child
Yeah.
has a substance, but if substances are being used, first can certainly work, and it addresses some of the risk factors.
Love it. So for those in the back, it's if substance use disorder is primary concern, probably not. But if substance use is involved, this would help with the things that might lead to using that as a coping skill. And then the UP does have,
Yes. BU just finished a large trial for comorbid alcohol use and anxiety disorders that they
Great.
are analyzing the data for, but the pilot studies were really good.
great. So they've currently analyzing data on a trial that had comorbid alcohol and anxiety disorders. And so far the preliminary results have been positive. Thanks for asking that. Perfect, thank you so much. All right, friends, so this is how it's gonna shake out. We're all together, having a great time, and if you want to go to the youth track, we just have space limitations, number of chairs that the fire marshal allows us to have in rooms. And so we have tickets for the youth session. If you have a ticket to the youth session, you'll go downstairs to that ballroom, and you'll be spending your time there this morning, and we will signal you when it's time for lunch. Lunch, as you can see, is out here on the patio, and we'll also have some space upstairs if you prefer that. And then you'll go back for the afternoon, back to the basement or to this room, and you'll finish out your training. So we won't be coming back together again, aside from lunch. We'll be spending our time in each of the tracks. So good to see you all. Thanks for being here.